Well, welcome back, folks. Now we're going to go ahead and reassemble the front forks. This one, the one furthest away from the camera, I've already done, but I thought I would demonstrate the process. It's a very simple assembly on this second fork. These tubes are original. They're not perfect. They're very good, what I would consider very good, but they're not perfect. In other words, I can get by, I think, on this project with these. You can see a little wear mark right there that you won't see when this is assembled in the bike. For this project, I think they'll be fine. It's certainly for a rider, that would be great. I don't think they really require me sending them out and having them re-chromed and reground. I think they'll be serviceable. Assembly is very simple. We have the spring, and we have a, for lack of a term, it's a washer right here that will go down inside of this tube. The spring will go in from the end, and actually goes in from this end, and we will put the assembly together, which is held in place by this nut. This seal right here, the inner seal and the O-ring on the inside, I installed previously, and I'll show you a little clip of that, the clips of me doing that installation here, and then we'll go ahead and put this assembly back together. I will demonstrate here briefly reinstalling or installing the new seals, fork seals, in these nuts. These nuts that hold the seals that are part of the front fork assembly. I showed in an earlier video removing of the original seals so that I could get these nuts re-chromed, which I have done. I've already talked about the return chrome. What you can see here is I have wrapped the nuts with just painter's tape or masking tape. This one I've already done. You can see here, I think. I've already pressed that in, and what I'm going to use, and I'll demonstrate this second nut here using my little arbor press. Now, I don't use an arbor press all that often. It's one of those tools that when you need it, it's really handy to have, but the reality is you can usually get around it. Of course, I have that large shop press that would easily handle this job. It's a little bit of overkill, of course, for what I'm going to do here, but it would work. You could probably put these in a bench vise and fixture it something like that and press it in the jaws of the vise. I've actually done that in the past. You could maybe even use a large C-clamp, which I have not done. But I thought I would demonstrate using the little arbor press. Again, I don't use it very often, maybe once or twice a year at best, because I have other options such as my shop press that I could use. I have new OEM seals from Suzuki. You can see right here, I bought 2 of them. These are probably NOS, old stock. You can see the Suzuki part numbers. I think you can buy these probably aftermarket as well. It's probably a standard size seal. I didn't really do any checking on it. Very likely a standard seal that you could buy from an aftermarket supplier as well. I have a large socket here, not dissimilar to what I had used to remove the seals. This one's a little bit larger because when I originally removed the seals, I had to go through this opening in the middle of the nut. Now I don't have to. This socket is a nice fit, as you can see there, for the outside diameter of the seal, and it'll fit comfortably inside of the nut like that. Process is very straightforward. I've got a piece of sacrificial MDF here, just something nice and soft. Again, I have the nut protected all the way around, the chrome, because this is freshly done, of course. The seal I will place in similar in that position. Take the big socket, I will align it like this, and then I will use the arbor press and just press that seal in. I am not at this point heating any of these parts up. I don't think I need to do so. I have made sure that the inside of the nut itself is nice and clean, as you can probably see there. So everything's nice and clean and ready to go. First thing I'm going to do is just put a little oil, a little lightweight oil around the seal here itself, just to ease this transition. Again, I'm going to use one of my personal favorites for something like this, which is just a 3-in-1 lightweight machine oil. And I'm just going to spread that around the rim again. Make sure your hands are clean. You hear me harp on that all the time. And again, the purpose of the oil is just to ease that seal into that cavity of the nut. And what I want to do here is get this seal positioned as square as I can with my fingers before I start the pressing process. Then I'll just take this large socket and I will center it like you can see there. Make sure everything's squared up in all directions. And then I will just take the ram of the arbor press and bring it down like that. And now we should be able to just press that seal right in. And I press it until I can feel it's bottomed out. And there we are. I'm going to check with my finger, make sure it feels square. That is, it's down all the way and then get cocked. It rarely does create a problem in terms of being at an angle or cocked. I think it's okay. In fact, I know it is. It feels just fine. And we have the fork seals now installed. I'm just going to wipe that, any excess oil. And that's the process that I use, or a process one can use, to press the seals back in the fork tube. Now we're going to go ahead and install these inner O-rings. If you recall from one of my previous videos, I talked about how this O-ring fits down inside of, there's a groove down in here. You probably can't see it from this perspective. You can see the seal right there on each one of them that I installed a little earlier. Now it's time to put these O-rings in. These are the originals, and these are no longer available from Suzuki. You can find them occasionally on eBay. They're not common. And when I have, in a relatively rare occurrence, when I found them, they are quite expensive. So I took the originals, cleaned them up, as you can see here. They cleaned up really well. There's no damage to them whatsoever. They're still quite pliable. They're not hard. You can see there. And I think they'll be quite serviceable. Now, if for some reason I couldn't use these originals, and since I can't get them from Suzuki, and if I wasn't able to find something on eBay, what I probably would do is see if I could find a comparable O-ring from one of the other manufacturers. Pretty much all the brands, well, I can't speak to Honda so much, but I know Yamaha and Kawasaki used a similar design for this at one time, about the same era or even earlier. And it's possible I could find a O-ring of approximately the same size from one of the other manufacturers, or even just a general purpose O-ring I could probably find. I would have to measure this up. That is the diameter itself of the material, that is the ring, you know, the external inside diameter, and then see if I could find something. And I probably could, but I don't think I need to go through all those gyrations. I think I can just reuse these and they'll be fine. There's nothing to installing these. I'm going to use a little 3-in-1 oil. You could use any lightweight lubricant. You could use silicone grease for that matter. That'd work perfectly fine. There's no reason you couldn't. And all I'm going to do is just put a little bit of oil on these rings. Just a little bit, just to ease their transition. There should be no problem getting these rings in. And as you can see there, just spread it around. And you will note that I left the masking tape and the original tape on the nut itself. That's just to protect the the chrome. These rings have to be installed from the bottom up because obviously the seal rather is right here. I could work it through, but there's really no need for that. Now this O-ring will go right in this groove. I don't know if you can see that. Lighting's not very good down in there, but there's a very obvious groove right down in there that I'm going to just roll this O-ring into, and should be really not much to this. Work it down in there equally. Might have to finesse it just a little bit so I get it where I want it. I know much of this you can't see right now. There. And that one's in place. I overshot it originally when I was putting it in. I overshot a little bit and I had to bring it back up. Same thing, just lubricate that up a little bit. And then we'll just work that O-ring back into that groove. And there. So both of those O-rings are reinstalled. I don't know if I mentioned that when I cleaned these, they had a little bit of almost like a scale from the dried fork oil. And I just used hot soapy water with dishwashing liquid and let them soak a couple of days and then scrubbed them up with a old toothbrush and they cleaned right up. You could also soak them in something like a thinner, a mineral spirits or a paint thinner, and that would probably cause the O-ring to swell. That's okay because when you take it out and dry it off and let it dry for a few hours, a day or so, it'll shrink back. But a spirits type thinner, paint thinner would probably work okay too. But there we have. See if I can get a light in there for you so you can see what that looks like. There you can see I think the O-rings are in place. So these nuts now, these fork nuts are ready to be used for reassembly of the forks, or the fork tubes. Also note that I've wrapped the fresh chrome on both units with masking tape. That's just to protect the chrome. And ultimately, I will wrap the tubes too, this one and this one, as part of the process as I'm handling them, just to make sure I don't damage anything. First thing we really need to do, let me just get this out of the way. First thing we really need to do is take this, for lack of a better term, this washer. This goes down inside the tube, like that, and I have to make sure that that's seated in there all the way. So I'm going to look down in there with my flashlight, and it's seated nice and flat. Then this spring, and this is not a directional spring. Sometimes you'll notice on springs they'll be wound differently on one end or the other. These are not, so that just goes in like that. And then this assembly, it's installed like that. Now you'll note that this collar right here fits down, that's this collar, fits down inside of the lower tube, like that. And there's spring tension now. Next thing we're going to have to do is take this nut. I'm going to lubricate that O-ring on the inside there, as well as the lips on the new seal with a little light oil. Again, you can use any reasonable lubricant that you want. I just used simple 3-in-1 because it's a lightweight oil. You could use fork oil if you wanted to. I've used just about everything at one time or the other. Spread that oil around a little bit on that inner O-ring, which is, again, I mentioned, I think, in the previous clip, original, as well as on the seals here, seal. And just make sure that that's spread all the way around, like that. The other thing we're going to do is I'm going to put a little anti-seize on these threads right here, so that when I install a nut in the future, if someone, myself or someone, has to get this apart, it should be easier to get loose. So let me get the anti-seize and we'll continue on with the assembly. A little anti-seize, and I'm just going to put a little bit around those threads. Like that. Just a bit, don't need a lot. Now we're going to slip this fork nut down over the tube. And you might have to fiddle with this just a little bit to get those little lips of that seal, like that, to start. And we'll just slide it down. Make sure everything's seated. And then we'll just tighten it up. And I just hand tighten these on a restoration like this because this won't be ridden seriously. If this was a rider, especially if I was going to be riding it in the dirt, I'd put a strap wrench on this and just snug it up, but hand tight for my purposes is going to be perfectly fine. Next thing we're going to install is this rubber dust boot. This is again a NOS, or a new item. I did put a little bit of 3-in-1 oil in here just to make it a little easier to slide on. You could use silicone grease, dielectric grease for instance. It doesn't really make any difference. What I need to do now is pull this protective tape off, temporarily at least. And then I'm going to slide this boot over like that. And then I got to get it down over the nut. And these can be a little bit fussy. And there we are. Now I'm just going to go ahead and retape this nut to protect it, the chrome that is on the nut. Of course that will come off eventually. And we've got this part of the shock reassembled. The only thing left to do now is at the opposite end, that would be this end, that would be the top, to install this cap bolt. This is the original rubber O-ring. These are still available from Suzuki, by the way. That is the rubber O-ring. But this is nice and pliable. Eventually I might replace these. We'll see. And I'm just going to temporarily thread that in until I install the units on the bike. That is the fork units on the bike. And then I'll obviously add fork oil through that hole. So there's the two front fork assemblies, reassembled, ready to go back on the bike. Again, they're very straightforward, very simple, one of the simplest fork tubes you're ever going to find. And the next step will be to install these in the triple tree. So that's going to be it for this video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.